Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffees on me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. When I started this passion project podcast at a low point of my time in Cambridge, I was genuinely motivated by three founding ideals. Number one, purpose of giving. Number two, learning from others. And number three, sharing of stories, which are aspirations still making up the content descriptions. Admittedly, I often listen back to those long-form conversations to laugh at how naive I am and was. But what gives me the enthusiasm and courage to host and share is a hopeful aspiration that this passion project, if wholly true to those founding motivations about giving, learning, and sharing, can be a worthwhile pursuit. Just before we dive into today's conversation, I'd like to invite our listeners to join the community of 25,000 plus at coffeesonmedavidquan.com, where we share legacy-worthy life study, career interview systems and resources, flourishing our hero's journey. You can receive my gift repository and newsletter now 100% free, all to pay forward my blessings. With over 100 legacy-worthy interviews and 100,000 plus downloads, this community is about giving, learning, and sharing together. Before I share the guest's official biography, I want to express my gratitude to those who made today's conversation possible. To 𝘮𝘮𝘳𝘕 for her thoughtful coordination, and Professor Ono's team at the Ellison Institute of Technology, Oxford, for their support. And to Professor Ono himself, whose generous LinkedIn message of congratulations following my election as President-elect Postgrad of the Oxford University Students' Union is what opened the door to this conversation. I'm pleased to continue an extraordinary season of conversations for the podcast. Following my recent interview with Dr. Arthur Laffer, the father of supply-side economics and presidential medal winner, alongside Dr. Mohammed Al-Arian, former CEO of PIMCO and president of Queen's College, Cambridge, Richard Verity, co-founder of the 𝘱𝘰𝘐𝑚 project and former partner of McKinsey, Dr. Ali Lukes, viral Cambridge scholar of olfactory ethics and Penguin author, Dr. Henrik Nordjocks, senior partner and APAC head of financial services at Bain, and Matthew Robb, former McKinsey partner and new CEO of MCAT, and also with an upcoming conversation next week with Sir Tim Hitchens, president of Wolfson College, Oxford. Today's episode is one I've been particularly looking forward to. As someone doing an MSc in education here at Oxford, serving as President-elect Postgrad of the Oxford University Students' Union, and whose late grandfather, Professor Ding Zuoyi, founded Xi'anfan University in 1987, one of China's earliest privately founded universities, I spent a lot of time thinking about what it takes to lead educational institutions, and what it means to build something new outside the public flagship paradigm. My late grandfather believed that young people are like water heated to 70 degrees. With the right conditions, they too can flourish. His vision was that education, not profit, should serve the public good. Today's guest has spent his life on a complementary question. How do you create the conditions where young people can flourish? He has led 3 major North American research universities, raised billions, and championed student mental health with a candor that few leaders at his level have shown. And now here at Oxford, he is leading the Ellison Institute of Technology, a privately funded research enterprise that sits outside the traditional university system while closely with it. That tension between the inside and outside, between established institutions and new founder-driven model, is something that I personally find fascinating, and something I think our audience in Oxford and Cambridge, students, alumni, and young professionals asking their own questions about. There are also details that would hopefully distinguish this conversation, and I want to name some of them before we begin. Professor Ono is the first Japanese American to have led the University of Michigan. He's also the only major North American university president of his era to speak publicly and repeatedly about surviving 2 suicide attempts and a bipolar diagnosis at 14, and again as a young assistant professor at Johns Hopkins, separated from his wife Wendy before ultimately receiving care at Shepherd Pratt Hospital. His trademark across 3 of his presidencies have been radical accessibility, rising at 4:30 a.m. In the morning to personally reply to students and faculty on social media, in his own words, to find out what they're worried about. And in late 2025, he was elected a senior research fellow at Worcester College here at Oxford, a return in some sense to the bench and science of immunology where he began. Now to the official biography and introduction of Professor Santa J. Ono. Senator Jeremy Ono is a Canadian-American immunologist and one of the most distinguished academic leaders of his generation. Born in Vancouver in 1962 to Japanese immigrant parents, he grew up in a household that placed the highest value on academic excellence and intellectual pursuits. He earned his Bachelor of Arts in Biological Sciences from the University of Chicago, followed by a doctorate in experimental medicine from McGill University. He went on to teach at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and University College London before a steady ride through university leadership, serving as president of the University of Cincinnati, then the University of British Columbia, and finally the University of Michigan. He is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In August 2025, he was appointed president of the Ellison Institute of Technology, Oxford, and global president of the Ellison Institutes. He also holds a professorship in hard pronunciation, but ophthalmology and immunology at the University of Oxford. We are delighted to welcome him today. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to it.
Thank you. How was your morning so far?
It was lovely, actually. I just walked from the store, the hotel, and then it was beautiful. Past the Ashmolean Museum, and then past Worcester College, which is just across the street from here. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Senator, in 2016, I believe, your younger brother Ken, who's one of the most decorated number theorists of his generation, published a memoir called My Search for Ramanujan. Chapter 21 is titled simply I Believe in Santa. It's about the winter of 1984 when Ken, then a high school dropout, ran away from home and got on a train to come live with you in Montreal while you were a McGill PhD student. Most listeners will know you as a university president 3 times over, but very few know perhaps that there's a chapter written by your own brother with that title. What does it mean to you that Ken chose those 4 words, I believe in Santa?
Well, I'll tell you who you're talking about. His name is Ken Ono, and the book was about Ramanujan, and he's an expert on Ramanujan. And Ramanujan himself is an extraordinary story, an immigrant from India, who did some of the most fundamental transformative work in pure mathematics. He became one of the youngest members of the Royal Society for that work. And my brother has looked at his writings that are written quite a while ago, and they're still very relevant. And so that's Ken. I'm very proud of him. And that chapter refers to, as you said, when I was a graduate student at McGill University, I was pretty new graduate student back then, having just graduated from Chicago in 84. And my brother, despite all of his successes, at that time, he was unsure of himself, whether he could follow the footsteps of my father, who is in his own right quite the number theorist, and who was, as you probably read, invited by Robert Oppenheimer to be one of just a handful of mathematicians from Japan to be invited to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. Yeah. And so that's quite big footsteps to follow as a mathematician. Yeah. And he was just a high school student, and he actually dropped out of high school, my younger brother. Wow. And so in any case, I'll answer your question. I just wanted to give some information about him. At that time, he was unsure of himself. He is an athlete as well as an intellectual, and he loved to ride the bicycle. But my parents were really focused, for reasons that we all now understand, on academic excellence. And instead of him riding his bicycle, they wanted him to study. They wanted him to do well in school and get into good universities and all that, which is not atypical of Asian parents. And in any case, so I think that's why he came to Montreal, to be free. And the chapters about that time, the fact that I believed in him, and the backdrop to what he meant was that we have 3 sons. The eldest one, Mamoru, is a concert pianist and a professor of piano at Creighton University. My younger brother, Ken, is a world-renowned mathematician. Yeah. And it was very clear at that time that they were 2 prodigies. My older brother played with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra and the Baltimore Symphony. My younger brother knew at a very young age, he said to my father, it's obvious that there must be an infinity, because for any number n, you can add 1. And he was so proud of that. And so that, in a way, gave a clue that Ken was going to become a mathematician in his own right. To answer your question, in that chapter you will have read that my parents thought that I could become a very successful businessman, but never an intellectual like my father. And so that was well known. It's well known in mathematical circles. And so his saying, "I believe in Santa," was kind of recognizing that he had come to Montreal to seek support, emotional and otherwise, from sort of the black sheep of the family, the one least expected to succeed.
Well, that reminds me of an interview you did a few years ago where you said, "Here I was, this pretty ordinary guy flanked by 2 amazing child prodigies, and I felt totally inadequate as someone who wasn't really fitting to be a member of this august family. I think my parents are pretty ashamed of me." Quite strong words. Could you elaborate a bit more on?
Well, I'm not sure that's the case. Unfortunately, my father passed away in January of this year, and I think by then, that he was proud of me, and my mother as well. But look, my brothers were prodigies. I was probably an above average student, and it was incredibly shameful for my father that I got a C in trigonometry in middle school, to the point where actually my mother had to go to summer school with me and took the same course so that I would get a better grade. And of course, I went to this summer school at Johns Hopkins with some of my high school mates who were actually 1 year younger, who were trying to be precocious and trying to study trigonometry before they took it in school. And they knew that it must have been because I didn't do well and I had to go get a better grade. So I think they were ashamed at one time, yes.
I'm sure they probably weren't ashamed deep down, but they loved you. They wanted you to do well. But I'm sorry to hear about your father's passing, and condolences.
Oh, thank you.
But when I was reading about your father, what I also found interesting was he wasn't, as you said, wasn't only a math professor, but also a pianist. And
That's
one
right.
of his conditions for moving to Johns Hopkins was that you get him the grand piano. What was he like beyond?
Well, I didn't get him the grand. Johns Hopkins bought him a grand piano.
Oh, wonderful.
As a child, I didn't have enough money for a Steinway grand piano, but yeah. So when he was in high school, he was precocious in piano, and he was taught by a concert pianist from Russia who taught around the world, called 𝘮𝘬𝘳𝘺. And I have actually a recital program of 𝘮𝘬𝘳, and he was quite the luminary back then. And this is in the 30s, or 40s, 50s, that period of time. He taught in Japan. And so my father was quite talented. I think at some point he probably wanted to be a pianist. And but he was also one of, as I said, a very small group of young mathematicians that was considered by the leading mathematician at the time, 𝘰𝘚𝘭𝘳, to be most likely to become someone notable in mathematics. And so he had this dual love of mathematics and music, and I think it's for that reason that he was particularly interested in Ken as a mathematician and Mamoru as a pianist. And I was this bizarre person who wanted to do biomedical research, of all things.
Wow. And do you know what got you interested in biomedical research?
Well, the first thing is I had to figure out what to do with my life, because I was sandwiched between these geniuses. I was just a regular person. And so the first thing I decided to do was, well, what instrument can I play? Because my brother's a concert pianist, and my younger brother is a wonderful violinist, so I better pick something different, so I picked the cello. I never was good at that. And then, what should I do with my life? I could never be a math student. That was made clear to me when I was an undergraduate at Chicago, and I was miserable as taking mathematics courses because I have no talent in that. And so I had read a book called The Double Helix, which is about Jim Watson and Crick, who discovered this three-dimensional structure of DNA. And it's for that reason that I went to the University of Chicago, because that's where Jim Watson went before going to Cambridge, where he met Crick. And I wanted to do biology. It was all the rage back then. People were trying to engineer life through what was then very primitive recombinant DNA technology, and I wanted to do that. It was kind of like artificial intelligence today.
Wow. So, as I was showing you before, because we only arranged this conversation at very short notice of a day, so I spent most of yesterday and very late into the evening kind of
Poor
reading.
you could have been outside in the sun.
It was wonderful. I found your story fascinating, so I prepared an interview guide with a chronological approach but also thematic approach. So the chapters that I categorized it personally, which may not be completely accurate, but I'll read them to you and I'll give you the choice to pick where perhaps you want to elaborate more and to start with.
I think you should go where you want to go.
Okay.
So that you have more time to ask any question you want, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, phase 1 is your roots, 1962 to 1980.
Yeah.
Phase 2, the dorm window and the Bond Chapel, 1980 to 1986. Phase 3, the John Hopkins Darkness, late 1980s to early 1990s. Phase 4, the Long Ascent, 1991 to 2010. 5 is the People's President, 2012 to 2016. And then Coming Home to UBC, 2016 to 2022. And then Michigan and the Encampment, 2022 to 2025. Florida, The Silence in the Room. 9, the Ellison landing in EIT Oxford. And then some thematic things like AI and the future of education, music, identity, China. And then I've also got a exciting lightning round, which I know you don't enjoy.
It's okay.
And also the This I Believe. So
Yes.
I think in your when you were so when I was reading your story, what struck me was the authenticity and vulnerability of many of your quotes that you don't really see in many other leaders. One of them is that you mentioned about how you went crazy. You started drinking too much. You were hanging out on the 4th floor window of your residence hall and your friends came to rescue you and they spent the whole evening with you.
Yes.
When you think back, like, what can you tell me about the people around you and how they have supported you at your most vulnerable moments?
So you've jumped from Baltimore to Chicago, which is fine, because I've talked a little bit about Baltimore in our conversation thus far.
Sure.
And so I went to the University of Chicago a little bit young. I was born, almost a year premature. So I was about a year younger than most of my mates at the University of Chicago, except for one who's a few months younger than I, who interestingly is one of my best friends today. Yeah. And so, I thought it was rather unusual back then for an undergraduate to drink a little bit too much, but now I've realized that being a president, it's not that uncommon. But nevertheless, I think I was a little bit lost because of what you mentioned about in the chapter from my brother about I Believe in Santa and the topic of shame. And so, not atypical of someone who goes away for uni, I had a mixture of homesickness and fear of being in a new city, very, very different from the suburbs of Baltimore. And I was grappling with a number of things, the feelings of inadequacy that we'll talk about later that you've touched upon. Yeah. And so it's not unusual to self-medicate, to drink, and many college students, university students do that. I think more in the United States than elsewhere because it's something they're not allowed to do until they get to university, and then even then they're too young, and so it's not uncommon for undergraduates in the United States to drink too much, and I was one of them. Yeah. But underlying that, it's particularly bad when you have feelings of inadequacy while you are inebriated. And alcohol is a depressant, as you know, and so it can make you even less confident about your life and where you stand. And so that evening, we were having drinks in the 4th floor of our dormitory, our residence hall, our college, as they say here, and I was undergraduate, underage, and I went up to one of the upperclassmen's rooms at the 4th floor of this Gothic building at the University of Chicago, and since I had too much to drink, I went out of the window. There was a window that was almost floor to ceiling. There was a very small, patio kind of extension from that window, and people were afraid because they could see that I was quiet, that I was, not exactly there, and hanging from that window. And below wasn't grass; it was the pavement. And so they pulled me from the window, and they took care of me and brought me back to my room. Spent the evening with me, making sure that I would be okay, which is amazing. I'm still forever grateful for that. And then even after that, for the days and weeks after, took care of me emotionally and spiritually, and brought me to a chapel called Bond Chapel in the University of Chicago. And it was there that I first had the realization that there must be something bigger. And I started my journey to becoming a believer in Christ.
Wow. Steve Barry is a name that not many people would know. Have you had a chance to see him in recent years?
We just spoke a few days ago. And one of the wonderful things about that group of friends is that even today, I would say 41 or 42 years after we graduated from university, we still get together regularly. And they've come to celebrate my investiture as president of different institutions. They've come to see me pitch the first pitch in different stadiums, because that's one of the things you get to do as a president and vice chancellor. We've been there to celebrate each other and to support each other in life's ups and downs.
I mean, faith is obviously always a journey, right? Like, we're all trying to learn more, I think. So, but for you, you also spent considerable time considering Professor Flynn's advice at Emory to be a so-called stealth Christian.
That's right.
But you ultimately came out and said, I cannot and will never be a stealth Christian. And as I was reading your faith journey, you continually quoted Mark 10:45 about the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, which anchors your servant leadership philosophy. But there was also a period that you as a scientist had, I believe, said to God, prove to me that there really is Jesus. Like, what's the proof in the end? Like, what gave you that shiver in the back that you talked about?
Well, that's an incredibly insightful question. And let me just mention briefly the priest at Flynn, who was a professor at Emory University. And you would think a man of the cloth would be the least likely to suggest to an emerging Christian that they should be a stealth Christian. And I'll just explain the story behind that. It is that many American universities are secular. They began as church affiliated, much as in Britain. And so if you think about the Ivy League schools, if you think about Emory University itself, it was a Methodist affiliated institution. But with the separation of church and state, many universities are not supportive or sympathetic towards individuals that are guided by faith. That it should be data-driven, evidence-based, and so that's the context. And it's even to the point, and I'm participating in something called the Veritas Forum, which came out of Harvard University, has now become global, which is really focused on ensuring that faith and the Christian story continues to be a subject of popular and academic interest, and also to support young Christians who want to pursue an academic life, because it's felt that being not a stealth Christian, but being overtly Christian can be a disadvantage in your progression and promotion as an academic. And so that's what I meant. And then your question about proving the existence of Christ. I mean, there are many things there in the Ashmolean Museum and elsewhere, the Shroud of Turin, a number of things that I've become familiar with. I've even visited Israel and Bethlehem. And so many of the things in the Bible you can actually find where they occurred. But more importantly than that, there are two things that have convinced me of my faith. One is that I've been tested, where I've had almost complete loss of faith in myself. But that inner story, together with the stories of many other people, feeling that in the depth of despair, that in reading the Bible and speaking to other Christians, that they're uplifted, is an extraordinarily powerful thing that's hard to explain otherwise. The second is that although now we're able to attempt general superintelligence through our AI, what humans are able to do through a process of evolution is simply extraordinary. We're able to approximate it with robots, we're able to approximate it with AI, but still what has happened is extraordinary. And if you think about what's happening with AI, we are, if you know the movie The Wizard of Oz, we are the wizard behind the curtain that's directing superintelligence. It wouldn't happen without us, a driving force, right? So the question is, what was the driving force that was behind the creation of these extraordinary beings called Homo sapiens?
Amazing. So, moving on to the Johns Hopkins darkness years, but before that, you met your wife Wendy in 1985 at McGill. So she was an undergrad, you were a PhD student, you married...
Naughty, right? I'm just joking.
So you married in 1989. When did you... how did you first meet her? Was it love at first sight?
Well, I think one way. I mean, I fell in love with her immediately. She was undecided, I think. And we met because we were in two laboratories that were collaborating. I was in Abraham Fuchs' lab. She was in Ron Gutman's lab, two immunologists. We were collaborating, which means the students had to collaborate. And there was a postdoctoral fellow as well who played the flute. And we decided to get together at Wendy's house in 𝘬𝘓𝘓, outside of Montreal, to play a trio. And what happened was that we played the trio, and her parents have always said, when we left the house, because they left while we were playing, there were three, and when we came back, there were only two, and that was Wendy and myself. And so that's how we met, through playing a trio, a flute trio.
So, what kind of, what was, obviously, I as an interviewer, one of the most difficult things for me is balancing the dual responsibility of, on the one hand, facilitating the sharing of your story, often otherwise unshared, but also respecting your privacy. So I'm doing it with the best of intention, because I haven't found much on, like, what was those 4 years of dating, like, what kind of activities did you guys enjoy? Were you spend a lot of time in the lab? Was it a lot of academic conversations as well? Like, was it?
Oh no! I mean, we that was the last thing we wanted to do, because that was our day job, as they say.
Yeah.
But she introduced me to fine dining. I was introduced to Chinese cuisine, Mandarin and Cantonese, and I was introduced to French cooking, because this is Quebec and Montreal. We went to theater. We ran into Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau at one of the shows at the Centaur Theater, and we went to church. I started going to church with her after Chicago. I was baptized at McGill at the church that Wendy introduced me to. So, she took the baton from Steve Barry, and she was the one who really gave me the structure in my life to really think about my faith and become a Christian.
And I think that context is really important, because your second suicide attempt came as a young assistant professor at Johns Hopkins, and you cited two primary forces for that. First was the enormous pressure for research funding, and the second one was that you were separated from Wendy. So, all the things that you talked about, fine dining, Chinese restaurants, culture, theatre, all of a sudden you didn't have it again. What was it like in that time? Because you held your story for, 25 years, and I just was wondering, like, when you look back now with the benefit of hindsight, maturity, the the stigma around mental health is a lot better than perhaps it was at that time for men.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was it that led you into that spiral, and was it preventable? Would you have done things differently, or how would you advise another young rising academic to cope with that stage of life, career, with the separation of family that comes?
Yeah, I think it wasn't the food or the theater that was the important ingredient of a relationship. It was more empathy, caring, a listening ear, encouragement to go to church. Those were the important aspects.
You stopped going to church?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because when you get very depressed, you become listless and you can't leave the house. And I'm sure the people who are listening, those who are struggling with mental health, have been there. And so when you're alone, especially when you've had a relationship and you're alone, and it's a very competitive, challenging time, at a time where almost no new investigators were getting federal funding for their research, that's a blow to an individual who's still creating a confidence. So the historical context is that I had attempted suicide at the age of 14. And that was, as you know, at a time where I wasn't sure about my value, whether I was loved and appreciated. And I was able to get through that, as you know, because of the help of my friends. And then I met Wendy, and then I was once again alone, and my confidence was also once again shaken. And so, hopefully that's helpful. It's true that back then, it was almost unheard of an academic to share their mental health challenges. And I guess to your question about advice, to keep fighting for mental health supports for adolescents and young adults. And I still do that to this day. I'm still working together with some domain experts in that area of mental health and wellness, because it's still an unmet need. There's insufficient support and funding for mental health supports in schools, in universities, and I have done this advocacy for quite some time at institutions, in jurisdictions, and I continue it today because there are lots of people who are not alive today who should be.
Can you help to better separate when openness liberates versus when openness actually endangers? Because there was also a time when even you had acknowledged that if you're early in your career, it is risky, it's not easy to talk about your challenges, and you wouldn't even recommend it. You have to be careful, and you have to think about who you'll reach out to. So it sounds to me like even now you still believe that there is a line for how to approach the sharing and seeking support.
Yeah, I think it depends upon your context. If you're at Goldman Sachs, or if you're in a department as a PhD student, there are very different environments in terms of supports for young people. There are some that are very progressive, that where individuals that will determine your fate to some extent are sympathetic, are empathetic, who don't have the attitude, look the other way, stiff upper lip, who will identify and recognize someone in need and provide extraordinary supports for that person. And there are others who are not that way. And it would be a career-limiting moment, as they say, if you were to open up and share your vulnerabilities. When I was able to talk about it quite openly, I was already a tenured professor for quite a long time, and a president who had just been renewed at the University of Cincinnati. So that's a position of extraordinary strength, as opposed to an untenured junior faculty member at Johns Hopkins, or a adolescent. And so still today I would say that you do have to be careful. People can judge you as being weak or not strong enough to thrive and prosper in a competitive field. But like I said, there are resources, even if you can't receive that support in your immediate environment, there are growing numbers of supports. And I think a growing empathy that mental health challenges is not anything to be ashamed of. There should be no stigma. It should be just like saying I have problems with my eyes. I have problems with my...
you break an arm, you go see...
Yeah, I have problems with my wellness. And we are all valuable people, and whether you've injured yourself or you have an abdominal disease or whether you have mental health issues, society should be there to support people.
And I think with support, there's also another dimension of support that comes from someone challenging you on your values and setting the expectations for you. And as I understand, 𝘬𝘵 actually challenged you as well. She almost didn't date you because you weren't, a regular churchgoer.
Yeah.
What are some of the, in that time of, you grappling with your mental health to the extent that you're comfortable to share, like what are some of the uncomfortable conversations or decisions that you've had to make, but then in the long run you look back and it's a blessing in disguise that you were challenged, not just I understand, like an empathetic approach?
Yeah, I mean, 𝘬𝘵 challenges me every day, even now. Even though, as you say, we were married in '89, and it's good to be challenged because, especially as I've moved up in my career, there are fewer and fewer people who will honestly tell me if they think I'm doing something wrong or if they think I should consider something from a different perspective. So that's why, to this day, 𝘬𝘵 is often the anchor that makes me think about. I may not agree right away because I'm pretty stubborn, but nevertheless I am listening. And when she does challenge me, it really helps make me think through a decision or a position. Sometimes it doesn't move, sometimes it does. Often it does because she's usually right and I'm usually wrong. But hopefully that answers your question. So, but every day, even earlier this week, I have to face a decision, sometimes consequential, not only for myself but for tens of thousands of people, that I'm not sure what the answer is, or there might not be a single right answer. And so I think that, to answer your question, it's really important to have a group of friends and your partner to challenge you, because otherwise you will make a decision that you might regret. And at least even if you made a mistake, if you can say that you really thought about it, it's a stronger position to be in.
And I guess the higher up you climb in any social setting, right, the more likely it is that people would try and agree with you or think twice about challenging you. So as you rose up through the ranks, how did you create almost like a board of people who would be comfortable to challenge you? Like, how did you create this environment where it wasn't just an echo chamber?
I mean, there are, at my stage after becoming a president, there were multiple kinds of boards. There are the actual board to which I report, and that's made up of people with different opinions sometimes. And then there are sort of what I call a kitchen cabinet, right? A group of people that are not by designation my board, but that I trust. And it's very common for people to, in my case it was quite formal. There were people I asked, would you be my sort of informal board? And to this day I wish I had listened to them more, actually. I think one of the mistakes that I've made in my life is sometimes not being willing to ask. So you can have such a kitchen cabinet or board, but at the most critical moment, if you don't ask them and you make a decision on your own, sometimes in retrospect you say, I wish I had talked to them, because they might have convinced me to do something in a different way.
I see. So did you feel like, what would you recommend are the kind of questions that people should ask, or when they should ask questions? Like, is there a framework for how you deal with ambiguous, nuanced contexts that don't have easy answers?
Yeah, I think it really depends upon who's on your kitchen cabinet.
Yeah.
If you have absolute trust in them,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be inhibited to ask anything. But you should be judicious if you ask silly questions like, should I wear a blue blazer or a gray blazer? That's a waste of their time because they're very busy. But usually the questions that you want to ask are very consequential. And as I said, I wish I was less selective in the questions I asked. Because if you talk to people like this who care about you or care about your institution, they really want to help. And if you don't give them an opportunity to help, they will be less enthusiastic, less engaged, less knowledgeable to give you the right advice. And if you don't even ask, then you have the chance that you could have benefited from their sage advice and moved forward and maybe made a mistake.
So, in your presidency years, obviously you've accomplished a lot, you and your team. A lot has happened, some bad things, some good things. There's a few quotes that I found quite interesting that I thought revealed parts of your leadership. One of them is that you said you're not attracted to being a boss. It's an opportunity to serve. It's an incredible privilege to make decisions, to make the dreams of those in that unit or in that institution come true. It's about building things. So when you first started a position of authority and influence, how did you approach the existing infrastructure, systems, processes, and how do you navigate this perhaps tension or opportunity with the history, the tradition, with the needs to modernize? Like, how did you go about building things, and what did you build? How did you build? How did you think about leadership in that sense?
The reason why your question is so important is that it's an issue that every leader has to face.
Yep.
So think about Irene Tracy. She's coming to a 900-plus year institution with pretty autonomous colleges that make hiring decisions, each of which is very different in their ethos, as you know. Same at Cambridge, which is even more decentralized than Oxford, as you know. And then here you are meant to lead and viewed as a leader with decisions sometimes in very fraught times that you don't have control over. And so I think that's a key point, is that this is something that wasn't unique to me, that everyone has to experience. And I would say that in these positions, it's easier in the U.S. because you actually have formal authorities, less decentralized than in a British university. But in any case, you have to lead by consensus. You have to lead by people agreeing with where you want to go or being part of that vision. And so a top-down approach, which is very corporate, usually doesn't work in a university setting because academics have strong opinions. They're more likely to follow, especially if they're heads of colleges, if they've been part of where we're going. And so that's to answer your question, how you do it. And the art is, if you have a view, such as a controversial topic, what role should artificial intelligence play at Oxford University, right? You could walk in and say, as Vice Chancellor, we will fully embrace AI, which will probably be unsuccessful. Or you can put together a group of thought leaders, even those who are not only early adopters, but those who are against it. And then you have conversations with them. And your task is to somehow, working with them, identify a vision that might be slightly different than your own, but directionally in the same way, so that you can try to move the institution, as you say, from traditional perspectives to one that has to evolve with the evolution of society.
So I believe there was a time when you declined 3 years of bonuses on the grounds of affordability. Some presidents might consider that politically risky as well, perhaps implying that their colleagues should do the same. For you, was that also a method of leading by example, or was that a method of like how did you come to that decision, and how did you contextualize it in the context that you were in at that point?
Well, at that time, when I was the president of University of Cincinnati in Ohio, that's a public university. And there are different kinds of public universities. There are those that almost appear private because the student body, the demographics are such, and Michigan is kind of like that, is quite wealthy. University of Cincinnati's student population is much more diverse, more middle class than a Michigan or a Virginia, for example. And so it was the right thing to do. Many of the students were struggling. Many of the parents were struggling to afford an education. And as the president of the university, you're not the highest compensated person. That's usually the football coach or the athletic director or the medical system head. But still, you're one of the 3 or 4 best compensated people. And so you're adding to the expense side of the ledger. And so, yes, it's important individually because you keep the costs down. I also sold the president's house at the time and created scholarships. But it's also important to set an example that if the expense side and the most compensated individuals, as I said, are the football coach, the medical system head, and the athletic director, and the president, if those individuals limit escalation of cost, that clearly shows the parents and the students who are working 2 jobs to afford an education that the leadership understands their pressures and wants to support them. It's important, I think.
How did you come up with the name @Ono? I mean,
that was quite long ago, and back then, the reason why a lot has been written about that is that then almost no university presidents were on social media, and I was one of the youngest presidents of a major research university, and I wanted to be accessible. I wanted to have a connectivity with the undergraduates, and how did I come up with that name? Well, I was president, so that's Prez, and Z was cooler than S, and Ono is my surname.
And better than President Ono, which would probably be a bit too formal.
Too formal, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
You've also mentioned in 2014 that you use this test. Essentially, it's the publicity test. What would this look like? It was front page of USA Today.
Yeah.
How could you elaborate a bit more on whether now with social media being more widespread, people making more diverse set of posts, has your standard for what should or could be on the front page of the newspaper changed?
I tell you, because I've been on social media for so long, I've made mistakes. Before I went to the University of Michigan, I wasn't exactly sure what their uniform looked like. And so I tried to. I mean, it's blue and gold, right? But I picked the wrong university team's photograph. And before going, I wanted to show enthusiasm that I was going to the University of Michigan, and I posted the wrong team's picture. And of course, immediately there's, oh, what an idiot! He picked the wrong team, and they were right. So there are some vulnerabilities if you have many followers, and also I'd say social media has become less innocent since those days. It's become hypercritical. There are people who troll, and probably even yourself, you've experienced that, right? And so so things have changed.
Especially being Asian American, right? As the geopolitical tension escalates, become a bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, I think so. And you have to. Things have changed, and you have to know that there's a vulnerability. There are times where it gets really very personal, and you have to learn not to take it personally, which is easier said than done.
So, 15th president of UBC, Vancouver-born boy back home. Did it feel natural?
It was amazing. I mean, I don't know if you've been to Vancouver. It's beautiful. It's kind of like Switzerland or Zurich in that you have an ocean, you have white-capped mountains, you have a modern, glistening emerald city, right? Because many of the buildings are green, and very wonderful food scene. Some say the best Chinese food outside of China. And I don't know if you've been there, but it's all true. And I wish I had appreciated all that more, but I appreciate it now. And yes, it's an extraordinary thing to come back to the university where you learn to ride a bicycle on campus. I left when I was 3, and we went to the home where we lived in. My brother played the piano there. My mother cooked, and it's very emotional. And there's actually even a little plaque on campus that says this is where Santa and his father and his brother and mother lived. Wow. And it's a wonderful university, very young university, much younger than Oxford and Cambridge and even Michigan, but it's an institution that has risen very quickly to being one of the top 40 global universities, and I think the sky is the limit. They will continue to excel as an institution.
So there were a few things that you did there which are clearly quite revolutionary. You know, there's the philanthropy that you've raised, more than 1.3 billion, if not more, the Climate Emergency Declaration, and also the first major Canadian university apology for residential schools, which is obviously a very bleak and dark history. When you and your team were drafting the residential schools apology, what was it like from the inside? Like, was it a straightforward process? Was it obvious? Was it also an ambitious, nuanced territory that you had to grapple? Because every word matters, its sensitivity, its emotional. What was the process of leading that process?
Well, you know, in retrospect, there's a lot of things I can say. The first thing that I'll say is that UBC has been kind of at the front edge of considering its role in history and trying to right wrongs that it was involved in. So, for example, my predecessor at UBC, Stephen Toop, who became Vice Chancellor of Cambridge, did something pretty remarkable in that, as you know, after the war, Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans were removed from their homes, often their belongings sold, and taken by train to camps called internment camps. They lost almost everything. Many of them were never allowed to return to the universities where they had been enrolled. University of British Columbia was one of them. And Stephen Toop, although it took quite a bit of thinking and a little bit of persuasion, decided to grant degrees to the remaining Japanese Canadians who had been interned, who had been forced to leave. Not by the university's decision, but really by Canada's decision. And that was remarkable. And what I did in terms of the apology for residential schools is that, as you know, after colonization, many children, indigenous children, were taken into schools, many of them run by religious organizations, away from their parents, in very, very severe conditions. Many of them were malnourished. It was very cold, and the whole idea was to take them away, to essentially strip away their cultural identity and to destabilize their families and their communities as part of colonialization. And the really terrible thing is, around the time I was there, graves were identified of children in residential schools who had died, who had been buried, and it was hidden. And University of British Columbia never ran any of these schools, but the fact that it knew this was happening, the fact that individuals who were educated at UBC stayed silent or were part of those schools, we thought was part of a responsibility by the institution and by Canadian society in general to apologize for that role. And it wasn't easy. People were afraid. There were individuals who felt that that was something long past, and there didn't need to be an apology. But the fact of the matter is that UBC is situated on unceded territory from the Musqueam people, and there needed to be an apology. And because I knew them, they were my friends, and many of them had been impacted by what had happened. And I got to meet residential school survivors, and I felt the grief. I felt the loss. And as the president of the university, I felt I needed to apologize.
Because in Australia, when Kevin Rudd became Prime Minister, there was also the apology in 2007.
Yes.
So was that like one of the precedents that you looked at? Like, because you obviously would look at the history of it.
Absolutely. That and Stephen Toope's decision to grant the degrees to those who had to leave UBC, the Japanese Canadians. I felt those were very powerful moments. They were an opportunity for an institution to right a wrong.
On a slightly different tune, you did pop-up cello in a Vancouver SkyTrain station.
Yes.
What is it about the cello that does for you that speeches cannot?
Well, you know, I love all music. I love piano, it's extraordinary. I love violin and flute. I love the voice. For me, cello was, special because it's something that I chose to, as I said earlier, do something that my brothers couldn't. and second, I chose it because it had the same registry of the human voice. If you listen to it, it has the lows of a baritone or a bass and the highs of a soprano. And so it approximates a human voice. And it's an instrument that many people love because it's very sonorous and soulful, and people love 𝘰𝘢𝘵𝘐𝘗 for that reason. And so, I played at the subway station to try to connect the School of Music at UBC with the Vancouver community. And people loved it. You know, we weren't an ivory tower School of Music in Point Grey, but we wanted to come back and connect with the citizens whose taxpayers' money supports the university.
So, as I understand, around the pandemic, it was a very formative time of transition for you. You mentioned how pandemic has been challenging for you personally. 2 elderly parents living alone in Baltimore, Wendy's mother also in Halifax. All 3 of them increasingly need us, and I was really touched when you said after several decades of taking care of us, it's now our turn to take care of them, which is reminiscent of the scripture language that you often evoked, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, did you feel like you were entering a different life stage and just a different orientation of what matters to you, and did your values evolve? Like, walk us through that period of transition and leaving UBC.
Well, I'll say that that was probably the second, at that time, most destabilizing moment as a university president. I was with Merrick Gertler, who was the president and vice chancellor of U of T at Oxford just yesterday. We were eating at the Ivy, and we talked about our shared experiences in different times, right? We've been presidents during what is most widely acknowledged as one of the most difficult times to be a university president, because COVID happened, and October 7th, and the tensions on campuses. And we have all university presidents, including Irene and Merrick and myself and all the Ivy League schools and around the world, have had to deal with things that were unprecedented. So the pandemic was one of them. We didn't know how to deal with it. There was no playbook. People were dying. People were dying in some universities. There was no vaccine yet. And so, and we were scared. You know, when we had, even with social distancing, students taking examinations in a large gymnasium with separation, some individuals became positive for COVID, and through social media, the view of some was that we had created a super spreader event. In retrospect, there was enough data to indicate it didn't happen there, but it happened somewhere else at a social event. But nevertheless, it's scary to be a leader when the very life of your community is in jeopardy.
Wow. Indeed, difficult times. I've studied education policy and international development at Cambridge, and now do a Masters of AR in Education. So your Michigan years were also difficult times, right, in the wider time, you know, 15th president, first Japanese American to lead the institution, Vision 2034. Some of your quotes there I also thought were quite revealing. You've mentioned speaking with moral clarity against any act of terrorism is not and should not be controversial at the University of Michigan. The disregard for safety directives was only the latest in a series of troubled events centered on an encampment that has always violated the rules that govern the diag. Did you feel challenged in Michigan, and also with obviously the DEI dismantling? Like, what was that period like for you? Because you've already had 2 presidencies, but it still felt like the Michigan presidency was uncharted territory.
I mean, so I want to be very clear that although, to answer your question, yes, it was challenging. It wasn't unique to me or to Michigan. I think all in around a dozen or almost nearly 24 university presidents during this span have stepped down for a variety of reasons. As you know, there were a number, even before the current administration, there were a number of university presidents who were brought in front of Congress, in front of the House Education and Welfare Committee, and everyone knows about the answers to the question by 𝘱𝘫𝘵𝘺𝘵 that resulted in her having to step down within months of being appointed president of Harvard University. The same happened with Liz McGill at Penn, and then many other presidents, either immediately after or somewhat after the testimonies stepped down. In my case, I had a transcribed interview together with, independently but at the same time, as Peter Salovey, the president of Yale. Those went well, and in the final report, there wasn't any specific criticism about Michigan. So I think, as challenging as it was, the first point is it was something that was being experienced throughout at least the Ivy League and elite flagship universities. It was a common experience of presidents at the time. So I don't want anybody to think that I was unique in any way. But it was challenging. And the reason why it was challenging at Michigan is that there are about 19% of the students who are Jewish, and a similar percentage that are from the Middle East, who are Muslim or Palestinian. You know, I think that there's pain all around. There was pain in the Jewish community because of what happened on the 7th. And there obviously has been long-standing pain among Palestinians and others who have experienced the other side of the conflict. And as the president of any university that is diverse and you have different views, it's incredibly difficult because you have to be empathetic and understand all of those feelings. And I believe I could have done better. And second, it's difficult because, especially at Michigan, it's an institution that has, through student activism, often moved not only at the institution and in the region, but nationally, been an important part of justice, which is something that should happen at universities. And there's a First Amendment. And so, but it's also important as the president, because you have a responsibility to the government, that you guard against any kind of discriminatory environment, any kind of toxic situation from any part of the community, that you have opposing expectations and forces. And the reason why those are difficult situations is that I don't think there's necessarily one right answer. And there's no answer that will please everyone. In fact, usually the moderate solution will make you unpopular with all, even though it might be the most equitable. And so I think, to answer your question, that's why it was challenging.
And on that point, I think one of your great strengths across the years seems to be your humility and reflective nature, where you recognize the challenges and nuances and don't claim that you have all the answer. So just very quickly on that, before we kind of wrap up that period, is how do you essentially deal with the critics? And DEI is arguably where your record looks the most discontinuous. You know, your critics would call it auditioning, quote unquote,
a flip,
whereas you call it evolution.
Sure.
How do you handle those kind of criticisms as a leader?
Well, I've been a leader for so long that I've become accustomed to that and insulated from that. I think the criticism is understandable. I was one of the leaders globally that was involved in equity and diversity, and there are good reasons for that. We had, at all of my institutions, as was the case in all the institutions in Florida, by the way, DEI plans.
Yep.
It was, in fact, the board of governors of the state of Florida had their own expectations and guidelines on DEI until recently. And so it was what we did at UBC in Michigan, and at almost all institutions around the world, including Cambridge and Oxford, were pretty much par for the course, and for good reason, because admission to an opportunity, access to educational institutions is critical for ability, permitting people to grow and to have access to all kinds of positions. It's a prerequisite, right? And so it's an important thing to make sure that there's equal access. And so that's why I think all of those things happen. When I say an evolution, it has to do with what not only myself, but Daniel Ďemeyer at Vanderbilt and Alan Garber at Harvard and Stephen Tup at Cambridge, we all have said that it's not 100% one way or 100% the other way. That institutions have to continuously evaluate the impact of their programs and policies. And so the evolution in all of us has been that, yes, we should have done all those things, but are there aspects of what we did that might have had unintended consequences, that might have made others feel that traditionally were in those who were favored or who had access to feel excluded? And so if you look and listen to people within your institutions and outside of them, I would say that increasingly, especially as time elapsed, that many people felt not part of the institution. And to give you a case in point, there's a lot of data out there about how diverse views are actually at leading institutions. And at many of them, the view is that there is a paucity of conservative voices. And to be a truly diverse, inclusive institution, right, you should be a place where both liberal, progressive, and conservative views and centrist views, that everyone feels welcome, feels part of the milieu or the ecosystem, and feels safe saying what they believe. And I think what happened is that over time, with the attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion, increasingly a segment of society felt that they were excluded, and that is also equally wrong. And so that is the evolution of my thought, if that makes any sense.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I'm very mindful of time, but also you got the Ellison Institute, which you have cited as the most exciting investment in research and innovation anywhere in the world. What's your journey to getting to the Ellison Institute? How did it all happen?
It was extraordinary. So as you know, I stepped down from the presidency of the University of Michigan, and I was offered and became president designate at the University of Florida. That was not successful, actually, for reasons that we've just been talking about, which is fair enough. And I was really, really blown away when I got a message from Larry Ellison, who said, "I've been watching all of this. We'd like to talk to you." And so I went to talk to him, and he said, we have these institutes. We have one in Los Angeles, and we have a large one that's being built in Oxford. And when I looked up what they were doing, I was blown away by its ambition and its magnitude. And he said, "I'd like you to join us." And so I joined. All of that happened almost immediately after my presidency was not ratified in Florida. And so I immediately became engaged in thinking about the Institute, and I arrived here in August. And after around 10 months, I'm just so proud of what's been accomplished. And I'm excited to have been welcomed to the Oxford University community at Worcester College, but also with academic units. And I've learned that Oxford University is an extraordinary place through that. And I believe that EIT will have a significant impact on science and translational research in this ecosystem here and hopefully in the UK. And I'm very excited as we approach the opening of the entirely new campus at Oxford Science Park. We're already working. We have 9 institutes and projects.
890 million investment.
Well, that's the
expansion.
That's the additional investment.
Wow, yeah.
But you know, we're already working. They're world-class scientists. They're hiring teams for their institutes and programs. And the new campus will open. The Sir Norman Foster 2 million square foot campus will be open next year. And Eagle and Child Pub will be renovated, and you and I will have a pint there, and it's extraordinary.
One thing that I found interesting about the governance structure of EIT is that it operates without a faculty senate. Without like an electorate with one ultimate principle. So public universities are often accountable through structures that are arguably slow, contested, and sometimes paralyzing. What does service and leadership mean in a commercial research enterprise? Is there other alternative opportunities?
I would say that EIT is something of a hybrid, because if you go there, you'll think you're at Oxford University. There are research laboratories, there are people pipetting, wearing white coats, doing world-class research. So, and there are students. We have Ellison scholars that are coming as undergraduates. We have doctoral programs that we fund. And so, in many ways, it'll look like any typical Oxford University research laboratory. But it's also different. From its very inception, the idea was it should be a place that, in addition to fundamental research, within a reasonable period of time, will actually come forward with solutions to some of the world's most difficult problems. That's not expectation at a typical university. And the hope is that, like research universities have done, that we will spin off companies from our intellectual property and our research, and we hope that they'll stay close to the mothership and contribute to the economy, create jobs for the UK, and that the resources from those will be reinvested into making sure that EIT is here 900 years hence. And so that's what's exciting about the model. It's really a hybrid model. In terms of governance, there's a founder, Larry Ellison, right? And then there's a management team, and there's representation in committees. It's not widely known, but there is governance, and there is an ability to contribute ideas and perspectives into where the Institute goes.
One final substantive question before we wrap up, I hope timing's okay, is obviously with AI and the future of education, you've mentioned how essentially AI will obviously shape our future. It's just how, and you've also mentioned how universities are not defined by tools, but defined by trust, and trust is built over time, essentially. And you've also highlighted about the need to build sufficient structure that help people in those moments of struggle, and to ensure that AI supports them rather than take away what is human. What's your vision of AI in education and society broadly?
Well, AI is already having an impact on universities. It has been for the past couple of years. At some institutions sooner than others because they're early adopters. 2 of the earliest adopters have been University of Michigan, and then about a year before Oxford, and then Oxford, who have taken enterprise-wide views on how to engage with AI, artificial intelligence, and a variety of things that they do. But I don't have a clear crystal ball of where it's going. You know, I think that, to be frank, the pace at which artificial intelligence is moving into everything from pedagogy to research is much faster than we had predicted. And that's what all the main funders of AI companies and platforms are saying as well. I'm going to speak tomorrow at the Oxford Biotech Summit about AI in medical research. And we're already seeing, there's one example of a new therapeutic that was almost completely conceived in terms of design and development by artificial intelligence, a landmark paper. And so I hope that in that area of medicine and therapeutics that everything will be accelerated and that we will be able to, hopefully within the next 5 years or at least 10, cure diseases that are currently incurable. That's exciting. But the other thing that I see, and I've written about this in Times Higher, is that we have to, as leaders of universities and research institutions with an educational component, we have to be very thoughtful as early as possible of how to regulate its use, how to ensure that it augments education and doesn't take away. There are already some troubling neurobiological data that in analyzing the brains of individuals that are continuously using AI, that it's actually impacting neuronal activity and brain function. And so as this becomes apparent, it's incumbent upon us as leaders to sometimes step back. And the last thing I'll say in that Times Higher opinion that I published a few months ago or a month ago, the data that we felt that was the foundation of our stance in adopting AI a year and a half ago has to evolve because we now have more information. And you know, that's my view on AI, is that we have to keep monitoring what's positive about its impact as opposed to negative consequences, and then adjust our approach based upon what we learn in the future.
Given time, I might skip the lightning round, which you have mentioned you're really bad at anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the final question is essentially around lots of people have helped you throughout your life and supported you in dark moments. Before I ask you to give a perhaps tribute to the people who have helped you the most, or just things that said, well, we can keep it in the recording to be meaningful for you, I just want to read out something from the UC magazine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
2014. This I believe. So while you think about your tribute, I'm just going to read out this very touching credo. I believe in believing in others and in something bigger than ourselves. I believe in the power of diversity and the promise of inclusion. I believe in first impressions and second chances, and I believe in helping everyone get where they want to go. I believe music is medicine. I believe caring is contagious. I believe a good laugh is a great thing, and I believe no kind act is too big or small. I believe in heroes. I believe in dreamers. I believe in teamwork, and I believe in leaders eating last. I believe teaching is a calling. I believe learning is a passport. I believe research is a lifeline, and I believe the world has yet to see the best from higher education. Above all, I believe the possibilities are limitless.
And I still believe that. And as I said, the tools that are before us in AI, robotics, automation are exciting if used properly. And I think higher educational institutions are indispensable because they are where the future leaders will be educated on how to use these responsibly. In terms of people that have played an incredible role in my life, there are many. I'll mention a few quickly. You know, I had a high school teacher. His name was Ed Gosnell, who, when I was in one of the dark moments, took me under his arms and went the extra mile. I was in Baltimore. He drove me after school as a high school student to Johns Hopkins University to listen to Nobel Prize winners speak, to speak about restriction enzymes, to speak about chromatin, to speak about the future of genetic engineering. And he didn't have to do that. He wasn't paid. It cost him money. He used his own money, and high school teachers don't make a lot of money, to buy instruments for me and petri dishes so that I could try to be a scientist because he believed in me. And if he hadn't been there, I don't know what I would have become. I want to thank more recently, in addition to my friends who saved me, and introduced me to Christ. One person in Britain, his name is Malcolm Grant, Sir Malcolm Grant. He was the head of UCL, a major British university, and then he was the chairman of the NHS Trust. He has unflinchingly, unfailingly been there for me, and I wouldn't be who I am without that sort of support. And finally, I want to thank Larry Ellison, because at a moment, as you know, of considerable turbulence in my life, he reached out to me and gave me this opportunity to be part of his bold and I think exciting, I think the most exciting investment in research and education and innovation anywhere. I want to thank him for giving me a chance to be part of that, even just a small part of it.
Believing in you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I think I'll end at that.
Well, thank you so much. I, again, really appreciated you congratulating me on my presidency as well with my election, and also how open and accessible you are in terms of responses, encouragements and support. And I really look forward to hopefully sharing some more conversations over the year ahead.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.